The wind tasted of rust and storm, carrying a hiss that scraped across the alien's membranes like sandpaper. It crouched low behind a collapsed strut, two hearts thudding against the thin plating of its ribs. The only thing in its grasp was a sweating cylinder of Terran lager, dented from the crash. Droplets slid down the metal and caught the pale light of the moon, absurdly bright against the ash-gray ground. Somewhere in the dark, a predator shifted, claws whispering over stone. It had been trained to maintain equilibrium under pressure, but the absurdity gnawed through discipline. The galaxy's most lethal hunter was out there. It was holding a drink designed for leisure on quiet human stations. It scanned the jagged valley, eyes filtering through ultraviolet and thermal bands. Nothing, only the lingering echo of the creature's hiss, and the soft pop of carbonation inside the can. Every nerve urged flight, yet retreat meant crossing an open plain where moonlight spilled like liquid silver. The can sweated in its grasp. Humans had pressed into the alien's hand hours before, during a reception meant to cement a new accord between species. They'd laughed, saying the local brew was the finest Earth had to offer. Their casual confidence had unsettled it even then. Now the beverage remained when everything else, comms, blaster, datapad, was gone. Memory clawed forward, dragging with it the night's earlier moments. The summit had been held aboard a rotating observatory above Helios 9, a moon prize for mineral seams and a stable atmosphere. Delegates mingled beneath glass panels that revealed galaxies unfurling like frozen fireworks. Humans stood out immediately, voices bright, laughter unrestrained. They were newcomers to interstellar politics, yet they moved as if they'd always belonged. One of them, an engineer with oil on his sleeves, had offered the alien a chill can. The alien had hesitated, uncertain whether ingesting carbonated ethanol would insult or impress. The engineer grinned, tapped the top, and said something about friendship requiring shared risk. It had tasted bitter and floral, bubbles fizzing up the alien's sensitive palate. Against reason, it enjoyed the sensation. Then the alarms had sounded. A tremor shuddered through the station. Lights stuttered. The host AI reported an unscheduled arrival, an organism classified only as Apex 9. Breach in the outer hull. Panic rippled through the assembly. Humans snapped to motion, issuing clipped orders, improvising barricades. The alien, caught between diplomatic caution and survival instinct, followed them toward escape pods. Everything unraveled faster than thought. A monster silhouette tore through alloy doors, its eyes burning like violet coals. Delegates scattered. The alien dove into a pod, gripping the beer without noticing. Pressure seals engaged, thrusters fired. Stars smeared the streaks. But the predator had latched onto the pod hull. It rode the vessel down through atmosphere, carving grooves with scything limbs until impact threw them apart. The pod disintegrated across a barren plateau, leaving the alien alone in fractured twilight. Static hissed from its collar transmitter, then died. The crash's shockwave had fried circuits. Around it lay wreckage, shards of transparent alloy, scraps of thermal padding. No weapon survived the landing. Only the beer, dented intact, gleamed amid the debris. The alien crouched, forcing measured breaths. It replayed every training lesson about emergency protocol, establish shelter, mark resources, evaluate threats. Shelter meant the twisted pod frame. Resources amounted to a can of lager, a few meters of torn seat webbing, and a half-charged distress beacon flickering on the ridge. The threat stalked unseen, powerful enough to breach station hulls, and survive re-entry clinging to a capsule. Another hiss floated through the wind, deeper than before. Muscles tightened. It scanned infrared again, nothing but the cooling wreck. The predator was clever, masking its heat. It studied the beer as though the answer might be etched on its label. Humans never parted from their brews lightly. Perhaps this container represented more than recreation. The aluminum felt surprisingly solid, pressurized, a potential tool if one stopped seeing it only as drink. Humans would. They were forever turning ordinary things into improbable solutions. The alien straightened, senses sharpening beyond fear. Survival demanded adopting that reckless adaptability humans wore like a second skin. Even the ridiculous could become strategy. A single thought steadied its hands. live long enough for the beacon to call a rescue ship. Live, even if the only weapon was a cylinder of fermented grain and carbon dioxide. From a valley floor came a faint clatter, stone disturbed by a heavy mass. The alien pressed closer to the strut, hearts racing. The predator was moving again, patient and silent, except for deliberate sounds meant to unsettle prey. The can's tab caught the moonlight, a tiny gleam in darkness. It tightened its grip, waiting for the next sign, ready to meet death armed only with wit and a borrowed taste of humanity. The stillness after the crash had turned brittle, every sound sharp enough to draw blood from nerves. The alien moved carefully along the wreck's edge, its steps absorbed by a carpet of ash dust. Behind a jag of rock something breathed, slow and enormous, each exhale lifting motes that glittered in the dim light. The beer remained cold against its palm. Condensation traced crooked lines across the dented surface. It felt absurdly alive, a reminder of a noisy human lounge where music leaked from wall speakers and risk was a game, not a verdict. A ripple of vibration reached through the ground, heavy pads flexing, claws raking stone. The predator was circling. Nothing in the alien's training covered enemies that combined stealth with deliberate psychological pressure. It felt the scrutiny, the same way prey must sense the hawk's shadow before it knows the sky exists. Muscles ached from restraint. It slipped behind a ridge and eased the tab on the can, letting a hiss of gas bleed into the air. The sound was tiny yet startling, and a sour yeast scent rolled out, sharp against mineral dust. If the creature relied on scent to track, perhaps it would fix on the new aroma, or perhaps the noise would provoke it. Either outcome beat waiting in paralysis. Moments stretched. The hiss faded, replaced by a rasp of claws nearer than before. The alien's pulse climbed, but thought rode above fear, cataloging details. Rhythm of steps, pause before each shift of weight, calculated menace. It remembered a human security officer on the station, an old spacer with half a lung replaced by polymer, telling stories about predators beaten by improvisation. Everything's a tool if you're desperate enough, she'd said, slapping a ration tin for emphasis. Inspired, it tilted the beer and flicked droplets onto the dust, then tossed it in a short distance. The aluminum clinked, rolled, settled. Silence held. Then a blur ripped through the gloom, jaws snapping when it had landed, shards of alloy scattered. The alien seized a moment to sprint across open ground, sliding into shadow before the creature's head lifted again. Breath ragged, it pressed against stone, evaluating the result. The trick had bought seconds, nothing more. Yet proof existed. The predator reacted to noise and motion, its caution laced with hunger. Humans would build from that sliver of data, layering risk until they either prevailed or perished spectacularly. That, too, was a lesson. It examined the emptying can, half the liquid still inside, foaming from the thrown impact. No chance to reclaim it without drawing attention. But there was another in the wreckage, untouched and intact. Retrieving it meant exposure, yet strategy demanded supplies. It slid along the ridge, body low, until the jagged shell of the pod appeared. The predator had been there. Prints gouged the soil, deep crescents with ridges indicating immense musculature. One talon gleamed, wet with condensation from the destroyed evidence it had investigated. The alien's eyes narrowed. Curiosity could be weaponized. It snatched the second beer, retreating fast into shadow. The hiss of shifting gravel came from behind. The predator had followed. Moonlight brushed his outline, a long torso plated with organic armor, limbs ending in jointed hooks, head narrow with a crest like fractured glass. Eyes burned faint amethyst, scanning. Its silhouette seemed carved from every nightmare compiled by sentient species. The alien forced calm, easing pressure on the tab just enough for another hiss. Foam spilled. It flicked a stream toward the ground, noting how bubbles evaporated in thin air. A plan formed, not solid yet, but sprouting like weeds through cracks. The beverage's gas content, the container's thin walls, the potential of pressure, all could matter. A guttural call rolled from the predator, low enough to rattle organs. It stepped closer, cautious, predatory intellect evident in each placement of weight. The alien shifted sideways, letting the moon's glare hide its outline while it gauged distances. A sharp toss sent the beer's remaining contents arcing toward rocks. The splash released scent. The can landed hard, ringing faintly. The beast lunged there, jaws closing around echo and foam. The alien bolted uphill, beak in sight. The slope forced claws from boots. Gravel slid. Behind, the creature spun, realization dawning, and launched after. Impact thunder across the valley. Stones skipping like thrown knives. Halfway up, lungs heaving. The alien ducked into a crevice and clamped its mouth shut against noisy breath. It measured each inhale, forcing rhythm into panic. The predator prowled below, snout sweeping, drawing in traces of yeast and adrenaline. Its patience frightened more than its power. It waited, knowing flight would resume eventually. The alien remembered another scrap from human conversation, about persistence hunters on ancient plains, chasing prey until exhaustion toppled it. That, the security officer had said, was humanity's secret. Not speed, but refusal to stop. The alien sensed a mirror image here. The predator hunted with the same creed. To counter it, one had to steal another page from humanity's playbook. Unpredictability. It allowed itself a grim smile, unheard in the dark. The beer was no longer a comfort or joke. It had become a lever for turning terror against its source. More experiments would follow. Pressure, scent, timing. There would be risks, yet remaining passive meant certain death. The creature believed it ruled the ground through strength. It had not yet learned how dangerous a cornered mind could be, especially one tutored, however briefly, by humans with too much confidence and a fondness for fizzy alcohol. The ridge trembled as the predator advanced, each step cracking thin crusts of stone. The alien crouched behind a shard of hull plating. Fingers locked around the improvised charge had built from scrap and the last can of beer. Pressure inside the container vibrated faintly, promising either salvation or sudden ruin. Cold air thinned its breath. It waited until the creature's shadow lengthened across the rocks, then triggered the seal and hurled the device downslope. The can bounced once, venting gas with a scream. The predator reacted instantly, lunging toward the sound. The improvised bomb detonated with a hollow pop that amplified against the cliffs, throwing shards of metal and a mist of fermented spray. A screech ripped through the dust as fragments tore through chitin. The alien surged from cover, pushing the advantage. It snatched a jagged beam and swung with precision, scoring a bright line along the beast's forelimb. The predator recoiled, violet eyes narrowing to knives. For the first time, its composure cracked. Rage replaced cold calculation, driving it forward in a blur. Claws slashed the ground where the alien had been an instant before. Heat flared in the wounds along its carapace, giving off an acrid scent. The alien rolled clear, heartbeats thundering. Victory required balance. Too much aggression, and the trap would turn fatal. It darted toward an outcrop littered with shards of the destroyed pod. Bits of conduit and smashed brackets jutted like fangs from the soil. As the predator closed, the alien pivoted and used the debris as a barrier, weaving through the obstacles while keeping just outside the lethal reach of hooked forelimbs. Each dodge was calculated, not desperate, feeding the creature's fury while buying seconds to assess damage from the explosion. Tiny rivulets of translucent fluid traced the predator's side. Not deep enough yet. A new tactic formed. If more pressure bombs could be prepared, perhaps the beast could be driven into a confined space where concussive force might matter. But only one can remain. The alien slid behind a boulder, unslinging the battered container from its belt. Foam jostled inside. It angled the tab halfway open, letting gas build as it shook the vessel carefully, remembering the rhythm shown by a laughing engineer who had once demonstrated how to startle a friend with a sudden spray. The memory steadied trembling fingers. Humanity's strange habit of wrapping problem-solving inside humor now felt like a compass. Even in mortal peril, there was room for play, for creativity that refused to spare. It snapped the tab fully, hurling the can beneath the predator's stance. A geyser of foam blasted upward, slicking claws and stone. The beast slipped, weight crashing down as legs scrambled for purchase. The alien didn't hesitate. It vaulted onto the creature's back, driving a length of rebar between plates of armor. Muscles bunched beneath, threatening to hurl it skyward, but leverage held long enough to drive metal deeper. A roar shook the valley. The alien leapt free before the tail could lash. Dust swallowed everything. When visibility returned, the predator stood trembling, one eye darkening as fluid seeped across its muzzle. Its body trembled between fight and retreat. The alien sensed calculation behind the pain, the same measured cunning as before, but now laced with uncertainty. That sliver mattered. The hunter had learned prey could strike. High above, faint lights pricked the sky, the first flicker from the distressed beacon. Reinforcements might come, but distance and atmosphere meant delay. Survival still depended on finishing what had begun. The alien studied the terrain, jagged cliffs forming a funnel that ended at a vertical drop into darkness. If momentum carried the beast there, gravity might serve as ally. Drawing a deep breath, it shouted a challenge, raw sound tearing from its throat. The predator answered with a growl and lunged. The alien sprinted toward the cliff, staying just beyond reach, using the valley's slope to build speed. Stones skittered underfoot. The roar behind promised the end if timing failed. Wind ripped past ears as the edge loomed. At the last instant, it veered sideways, planting a foot on solid ground while swinging a scrap of plating like a shield. The predator, committed, tried to break, but slick foam and loose rock betrayed it. Momentum launched the massive body over the brink. Instinct made the alien grab for the ridge, yanking itself flat as claws slashed empty air. A bellow dwindled into silence below, followed by a crash that shook the cliff base. Dust gusted upward, coating everything in pale grit. Stillness returned, broken only by the alien's ragged breaths. Muscles quivered from strain, but consciousness stayed sharp, waiting for movement in the haze. Nothing rose. The galaxy's deadliest predator lay shattered in the abyss. Relief came cautiously, fragile as frost. Yet survival meant more than outlasting danger. It demanded proof to those arriving that intelligence, not accident, had shaped the outcome. The alien collected remnants of the improvised bombs and arranged them beside gouges left by the fight, silent testimony of method and will. Soon a ship's thrusters would carve streaks across the moonlight, and observers would see an unarmed diplomat standing amid wreckage, alive because it had dared to twist a fragment of human culture into strategy. Stars glimmered above the plateau, cold and steady, while the wreckage cooled to a dull ember against the night. The alien stood at the rim of the chasm, still tasting iron and carbonation on its tongue. Far below, the predator's body lay twisted among broken slabs, a shadow finally pinned by gravity. For the first time since the crash, silence felt clean rather than threatening. The distress beacon pulsed steadily from its perch, casting a pale halo on nearby stones. Each flash reminded the alien that survival was no longer a theory, but a fact. It lowered itself onto a smooth slab, body trembling from spent adrenaline, and let the wind carry heat away from aching limbs. The empty beer can rested beside its foot, crushed from the final throw. Strange that such an unremarkable object had rewritten the ending of an encounter written in blood across centuries of natural selection. Lights winked on the horizon, rescue craft burning atmosphere. Engines whispered against thin air, gathering volume until they roared over the valley. Dust rose in curling veils as landing skids touched down. Humans spilled out, moving with brisk efficiency, their faces hidden behind helmets that reflected moonlight. One approached, scanning the abyss, then turned and raised a thumb. A voice crackled over external speakers, equal parts relief and humor. "You're one tough diplomat." Another helmeted figure retrieved a crumpled can, studying the puncture in its side, then laughed. "Guess we'll have to add beer to the approved ordnance list." The alien accepted a ration water flask, but shook its head at the offer of weapons. It gestured instead toward the cliff, explaining in clipped phrases how an improvised charge and a bit of pressure physics had tipped the balance. Listeners exchanged glances through tinted visors. One clapped a gloved hand against its shoulder, wordless recognition of grit that transcended species. Inside the shuttle, med scanners traced bruises and shallow cuts. As antiseptic gel cooled against torn skin, the alien gazed through a viewport at the shrinking battlefield. From above, the valley seemed no more remarkable than any other patch of rock. Yet for one narrow interval, it had held the sum of calculation, risk, and raw that defined sentient life. The flight back to orbit was quiet. Crew members respected the hush that follows survival. Only once did someone break it, speaking softly about a pub on Ceres where survivors were owed around. The alien allowed a small, weary smile. Perhaps it would learn to enjoy beer without needing to stake its life on the outcome. Docking clamps engaged with a metallic sigh. Station lights spilled across the ramp as the shuttle door hissed open. Delegates waiting beyond craned for a first look at the one who had walked away from Apex 9. No speeches emerged. Only nods, murmured acknowledgments, the subtle shift that occurs when reputation grows heavier than introductions. Later, alone in a quiet cabin, the alien examined a fresh can of lager someone had left on the table with a note. For next time, aim carefully. It turned the container in its hands, considering the curve of alloy and the way bubbles ticked faintly inside. What had begun as a cultural courtesy had become symbol, proof that ingenuity hides in the least obvious places. Through the viewport, the moon spun slowly below, its cratered surface glinting where light touched jagged glass. Somewhere beyond, uncharted sectors waited, and with them other predators, puzzles, and improbable allies. The alien felt no urge to retreat from that prospect. It had learned a truth humans carried instinctively. The universe rewards boldness tempered by thought, and sometimes the smallest artifact, a tool, a word, a sip of something cold, can shift the course of survival. It set the can back on the table, unbroken, and let fatigue wash over taut muscles. Tomorrow would bring debriefings, negotiations, perhaps another invitation to taste Earth's eccentric hospitality. Tonight there was only the steady hum of life support and the quiet satisfaction of having met the galaxy's deadliest hunter armed with nothing more than nerve, quick study, and a borrowed drink. Sleep came easily, light and dreamless, as engines rumbled far below, carrying the ship and its passengers toward a future that suddenly felt wide as the stars. Docking clamps released with a sigh as the shuttle drifted free of the station. Inside, the alien watched stars slide across the viewport, each point a quiet reminder how vast the galaxy remained. The engineers had insisted to take a short leave before the next round of negotiations, citing post-predator decompression. Humans always found a phrase for everything. A metallic clink drew its attention. Someone had slipped a narrow case onto the seat beside it. Inside lay 3 cans of Earth lager, polished smooth, each labeled in bold script. Emergency use only. A note beneath read, for scientific fieldwork or desperate diplomacy. The alien's mandibles flexed in a silent laugh. It closed the lid and studied the reflection staring back from the viewport. Posture straighter, eyes less cautious. Experience had carved away hesitation, leaving a shape it scarcely recognized, one prepared to meet whatever waited beyond familiar charts. An alert blinked on the console. A minor distress signal pulsed from a mining outpost on the edge of a blue-white nebula. Pirates, or perhaps another creature clever enough to stalk among the stars. Crew chatter filled the cabin as pilots plotted a course. Someone asked if their passenger was ready for trouble again. The alien rested a hand on the case of beer and gave a single measured nod. Stars elongated into thin lines as the shuttle entered faster-than-light transit. Within that stretched silence, a thought settled like calm water. Survival was no longer the only goal. There was understanding to chase, allies to surprise, predators to outthink, and sometimes a beverage to raise after the dust cleared. Whatever shape the next challenge took, it would meet it with the same mixture of caution, craft, and the wry humor borrowed from humanity. For now, it leaned back, let engines carry forward, and allowed a faint smile to linger, the quiet promise of more stories waiting just beyond the next jump.